This presentation is supported by our regional water supplier, Tarrant Regional Water District. TRWD maintains 4 area lakes and pipelines needed to provide surface water to local water treatment plants so they can clean it to meet drinking water standards for our communities. They also work with many cities in Tarrant County, such as Fort Worth, Arlington, and Mansfield, to provide water conservation programs for the community. Conservation is an important water supply strategy to help meet the needs of a growing population. There are currently 2.3 million people in Tarrant County, and this is expected to double over the next 50 years. This is why TRWD supports many programs that help save water through outdoor watering and gardening education. At SaveTarrantWater.com, you can sign up for free weekly watering advice custom to your location. If you are a resident of Tarrant County, you can sign up for a free sprinkler system checkup where a licensed irrigator comes to your home and provides a comprehensive evaluation of your system with recommendations to reduce water waste. There is also an event calendar where you can find important information about future classes and workshops. TRWD also partners with organizations like Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service and the Tarrant County Master Gardeners to provide educational programs just like this one. Be sure to check out SaveTarrantWater.com and sign up for their free services.
It is such a pleasure to talk about wasp and bees. I've been fascinated with those guys since I was a little kid. Tell you more about that later. First of all, wasp and bees are in an insect order called Hymenoptera. And I put them together because sometimes they are confused. They have a lot of things in common. They may look similar. Most wasps and bees have 2 pairs of wings, and some of them sting. And I think we're all acquainted with some of those that do sting. Their metamorphosis is complete, just like moths and butterflies and some of the beetles. Metamorphosis for wasp and bees has 4 parts: eggs, the larva, the pupa, and an adult. And this is an amazing fact. There are 18,000 different species of wasps in North America. We're going to talk about maybe 5 or 6 of them, but how about learning all 18,000? That would be quite a chore. Now, there are 10, about 10% are social, and those social ones are more aggressive. And what do I mean by social? It means they're going to be a colony of them rather than just individual bees going off and doing their own thing. Wasps mostly feed on other insects and spiders, but then a lot of the adult wasps provide pollen to their larvae to help the young wasps develop. The one difference that you usually see when you look at them is that wasps are less fuzzy. More of the bees are fuzzy, maybe not their entire body, but a lot of fuzzy on their abdomens, on their heads, and you'll notice that big difference. The main section of a wasp's hourglass-shaped body has no hair at all, but there are some wasps with hair or with some fuzzy. Now, those social wasps live in colonies, a single queen. They do hunt the prey for their larvae, and they sting if threatened. And each one of those groups has a different level of stinging, whether they're threatened or not. A lot of them, if they're foraging, they'll ignore you. First of all, paper wasps. And I met paper wasps as a little kid. When I was about 4 years old, we were in East Texas. We lived out of Texarkana in the country, and there were huge signs. You know, the road signs back then, even they weren't high up in the air, they were down low to the ground. And on the back of this big one, not far from our house, there were several paper wasps that had built their nest on the back of the sign. Well, my brother was always daring me, and he dared me to go and get one of those wasp nets and bring it to him. I was 4 years old. I thought my brother was infallible. So all I did was prance over, pull off one of those little wasp nests, and bring it to him. Wasps were flying around me. They did not sting me, but he ran, of course, so I threw it in. So they're not always going to sting you, but I learned early on, two things. Paper wasps do not want to be bothered, and don't trust your brother. The ones in East Texas, most of them are this red paper wasp, a little different from the ones we have here. They're actually 6 different species of paper wasp in Texas, and this is just 2 of them. The most of the ones on the east ones are the red ones. You don't see as many of those color here. There's a honeycomb pattern of their nests. They're all similar. Right now, I have a big one on the back of my house and on the front of my house. And I leave them if they're close to the door. But if they're close to the door, you better move them. Mailmen might not want to deliver your mail to your door if those paper wasp nests are too close. Here's the eastern yellow jacket. That's another one that's the colony one. Now, look at this one real closely. This is the eastern one. Now, look at this one. They're different, and yet they are so similar. You probably wouldn't know it, but the one thing that's similar is the nest. These yellow jacket nests, the eastern ones, that's east of Dallas, out toward the big piney woods, those nests are more commonly in structures, in old sheds, in walls, but the ones in West Texas are more the ones that are in the ground. And that's what I became acquainted with, was ones in the ground. My son was mowing a new area of the yard, and he ran into a yellow jacket nest that was in the ground. They nest in old mice holes, structures left from other critters, and he got quite a few stings when he tried to use a water hose, thinking that would knock them off. Well, it just made them mad, and he did get some really bad stings. So yellow jacket is not to be messed with. There's another one that's in the same family. It's a yellow jacket, but it's not yellow. It's the bald-faced hornet, and it's white and black. That one, you're going to see its nest up in the air. The one I saw that was big like this was at Lake Tawakoni in eastern Texas, and it was close to the lake in a wooded area. And I tell you, the kids were walking by and they said, "Ooh, that looks like a great piñata." Don't think they better try knocking that one down. Now, let's look at the solitary wasps, because they're the most numerous, because 90% of that group of wasps globally just don't live in colonies. Some do build nests, some don't. Some are parasitoid wasps, and they lay their eggs directly on their prey. So quite a variety of the solitary wasp. Here are some types, and I bet you have most of those in your backyard. Maybe not one of them, you might not. But mud dabbers, otter wasps, cicada killers, sand wasps, digger's wasps, and the parasitoid wasps. Think about how many of those kinds of wasps you've had in your yard. First of all, let's look at the most common one, the mud dauber. The mud dauber is one that, well, I have little structures on my front door almost every year from these little guys. They're fun to watch. If you have a muddy spot in your yard, you'll often see these little guys making little balls of mud and taking it to the wall to build a structure. Now, the different mud daubers build little trails that are a little bit different. This is one of them. But after they have built it, they go and many times it's a spider. They get a spider, they put it in, and then they lay an egg on it. And you can see this one's been pulled off the wall. And you can see on the far left, you can see it looks like the remains of a spider. They paralyze them, and then as the egg turns into a larva, it eats the spider. Then on the right side, you'll see those are the pupas stage of that mud dauber. And then the one next to the left there looks like it's almost ready to come out. When they get to be an adult shape, they make a hole where it had been sealed up. They make that hole. Hang on, let's go back. They make that hole and they fly away and leave it. Now, The mud dauber doesn't protect its nest. They usually will not bother you if you leave them alone. If they're out foraging, they very seldom do. If you put your hand on near the nest, they might, but they are not. Um, they're not aggressive. The only time I've ever been stung by a mud dauber was on the windowsill. I saw one that was dead. I picked it up and it was dead, but it still had some part of its body was still active because it stung me. So they can sting you even when they appear to be dead. Here's another one that has some similarity with potter wasp, but this one you probably wouldn't see unless you were really further east or in the Houston and the area there in that part of Texas. These little guys use mud just like the mud dauber does. They take the clay, mix it with saliva or with the puddle that they find, and they make these little pots. I want you to look at the pots here. You see on the right, they have used a board to plant these on, but a lot of times you'll find these little pots on stems, a piece of tree, a bark, and they'll each individual little pot becomes a home. If you look at the other side, you'll see it looks like, again, maybe a spider or the remains of something. And then on the other side, you see one that's getting ready to make a hole and come out. So the potter wasp is a fascinating one. I did see them in East Texas, but I have never seen them in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. But they're just so interesting because they're similar to the way the mud dauber works. Here's another one that is fascinating to me. The first time I met a cicada was outside my front door, and I had some holes in the bare ground next to some plants, and I saw one day this guy come out of the hole. He's a cicada killer. He flew out, sounded really buzzy, angry, flew parallel to the ground about 3 feet high, and just circled and circled and circled. And I thought, that's strange. He made no attempt to sting me, even though I was very close by. And I thought, this is strange. And then I found out what his name was and how he got his name that's what he does. He kills cicadas. He drags them back to that hole in the ground, and then he lays his egg on it. And there we have another cicada killer. Well, you think about cicadas. If you think about 17-year locusts, you've heard of them. That's the same thing. But the ones here have not 17-year cycles. They may have, but the main ones are 1, 2, 3, and 5-year cycles. So there can be cicadas every single year, which means that cicada killer has plenty of food coming out of the ground every year for him. I was at Texas Wesleyan one year, and outside the science building, there was a flower bed that had several holes, I noticed, and there were about a dozen of these cicada killers flying around. I thought that was unusual because in my yard, I've never seen more than one at a time. I asked the professor, and he said, "Oh, we're doing an experiment." And this is a study that the class is doing. I didn't hear the results of their class, but the interesting critters. There are different caterpillars in the state of Texas, and they are our large wasp. They're the larger than any of the other locally. Here is a possible hole for a cicada. Those look like the ones in my yard. Here's another one that's fascinating, the little sand wasp. The little sand wasp does go into the ground. He's a burrowing one. What they eat, flies, mosquitoes, and all like that. As an adult, they eat the nectar flowers, but they're flies and mosquitoes. Maybe they have all of them they want. Here's another a digger, golden one, and here now digger wasps. They appetite is they eat grasshopper and caterpillars. Take them down in the ground, and most of theirs is found. Here's another that I know you've seen lots of these oak trees. Every oak tree that I have seems like it's got some kind of galls. Some of them are as big as a table tennis ball, and some of them are different shapes and sizes. And all they are, most of them, not all of them, but a lot of them are a home for a wasp. The wasp comes along, lands on a part of the tree, lays an egg in the tree. The tree builds a for the wasp, and the tree is actually lit. It's mostly cosmetic, doesn't seem to affect the growth of the tree, but there we had not go a whole program on wasp, that all wasp, and it's a fascinating topic. I hope that some of the rest of you go in and find out which ones are flies, which ones are bees, things that make those. But remember, that's a fascinating study, and they all in the web of life. And on the other side, you see this a hornworm, little hornworm. They devastate my tomatoes every year, it seems like. But I saw this happen. If your little white things on his back, there's another wasp, a broccoid wasp, that lays its eggs just below the skin, a healthy hornworm caterpillar. They all hatch out. They eat the inside of the caterpillar, and then they pop out little cocoons like little tiny Q-tips, and they stay there until they're ready to emerge and fly away. The caterpillar was a host to them, but it eats the inside of the caterpillar. Here's the most fascinating of the wasp, and its name is ant, and it acts and looks more like an ant than a wasp. He's fuzzy. Wasps are not supposed to be that fuzzy. I saw one of these last week in Dallas. They are, it's amazing. There are, according to A&M, there are about 84 different kinds of velvet ants in Texas. They all look a little similar, but the one I saw was just like this picture. And this is what I saw as a kid. They would often be in the cattle barn. And the thing about them is the female has a really vicious sting. They're called cow killers. The female doesn't fly. The male flies but doesn't sting. So an interesting wasp that's called an ant and that looks more like maybe a bee because he's fuzzy. But remember, there's always an exception to every general rule about wasps and bees and everything else we study. Now, how about bees? That was the other part of our program. And honeybees, that one we know. It was imported to the US in the 17th century. The colonists missed their bees, they missed their honey, and all they had to do was import a few. And now we have them all over, and they're doing a valuable service for us. Their cones can have thousands of bees in each hive, and they're all busy. We are proud of what we get from them, and people use truckloads of honeybee hives, moving it around the state to every area, agriculture area that needs pollinators. Now, Texas bees in general, there are over 800 species of bees in Texas. Not as many as wasps, but a lot. Over 70 of those provide essential pollinator services to plants like fruit, vegetables, and the nut crops. So we need them. Oh, 90% of bees are solitary, just kind of like in wasps. These nests are established and provisioned by one single female bee in most cases. But again, there are exceptions. They typically nest in the ground or in dead wood material. Generally, these bees are harmless. Not always. First of all, bumblebee. Big guys. I love the bumblebees. As a kid, they would get in flowers that were big, and we'd take the edge of the flower and hold it together so we could hear them buzzing inside. And Their inside of their nest is very, very different. It isn't like a honeycomb at all. It's little pots all stuck together. And each of those little pots is home for a new bumblebee. Now, bumblebees colonies, instead of huge like the honeybees, they have 50 to 400 individuals. Much smaller group, but still a lot if you can think about 400 bumblebees. 9 bumblebee species are in Texas. And I've gone to programs that introduced all 9 of those, told what part of Texas they lived in. More of them are in the eastern part of Texas than in the west. There are fewer in the west. Some of our bees, not just in Texas, but throughout the United States, are endangered. We have destroyed habitat, and pesticides and stuff have really reduced them, some of the species. The nest is usually in an existing cavity, underground usually, and they don't make their own home. They use somebody else's and move in. And this is an interesting one. The bumblebee hives have gotten to be a big business. During the past 20 years, agricultural demands for bumblebees has really increased. They are used to pollinate berries and peppers, and especially hothouse tomatoes. So the next time you buy hothouse tomatoes, you can always wonder, was it a bumblebee that pollinated those things for me? And this statement just fascinates me because when we were in Colorado, we were up in the mountains a lot, I noticed in the alpine area, there were often bumblebees, more so than any of the other bees. But there's a good reason. Their wings beat 130 or more times per second. Try that. It can't be done by us. The wind speed and the wing speed and their large size enables them to perform what's called buzz pollination. It vibrates the flowers until the flowers release the pollen. It's like they tell you to go. I know that as a kid, we'd go out and we'd slap the tomatoes, particularly slap the blossoms around a little to make sure the pollination took place. Well, that's what the bees' wings do, the bumblebees. The insect size also allows them to generate heat. So bumblebees can fly earlier and later in the day, as well as in cooler, higher altitudes than honeybees can. And when I found that statement, I realized why I saw more bumblebees in the alpine meadows than I did of the other insects. Fascinating, guys. Here's another one that I'm very acquainted with, the carpenter bee. Here's a couple of pictures of him. They're very definitely local. The female carpenter bee excavates. They go into tunnels in wood, lay their eggs, enlarge, and you reuse old ones. The adult carpenter bees hibernate during the winter, usually in abandoned nest tunnels. And this was an interesting because we think about solitary, we think about bees, all of them, and wasps as having one female and then a few males. Well, they typically have about 4 females and 12 males. Interesting, carpenter bees. Well, they seldom are as destructive as termites, but they can cause cosmetic structural damage. That's what happened to my house. The timbers coming out the front of my house, I noticed some problems. And when I got on a ladder and got up and looked at it, I found that I didn't realize what kind of bees they were, but they were really busy. They had done just exactly like termites do. They had eaten into the timber and they had completely ruined about a foot of that timber sticking out of the house. It finally had to be, I got rid of them, but I finally had to cut that off. Large carpenter bees are also able to do this buzz pollination like the bumblebees do. Carpenter bees are excellent pollinators, and they're known to pollinate eggplant, tomatoes, and other vegetables and flowers. So important pollinators. And another one of our common bees is the carpenter bee. This one, this This is an interesting statement. In various regions of the world, large carpenter bees are important pollinators. In Brazil, they pollinate passion fruit and Brazil nuts. In Australia, they're used in greenhouses to pollinate tomatoes. In the Middle East, they pollinate the cotton plants. So busy carpenter bees. And mason bees. Mason bees are another one you'll find around here. There are 140 different species of mason bees in North America. They're major pollinators of orchards and some other commercial crops. The female is considered non-aggressive. The males may be buzzing around so much that they think they'll sting, but again, they don't. This one is this statement tells you a little bit about how they do their thing. The solitary mason bees choose a nest location in hollow stems, cracks in between stones, and cavities in wood. They use existing things. They don't make a new one. In the spring, when the mason bees emerge from the nest, the females will mate and then search for a new nesting site. She will collect pollen and nectar to create a mixture that is used as a provision for the developing brood. So instead of getting a spider or something to stick in the cavity that she's located, she does the pollen and nectar route. And here's one that's fascinating. If you ever get a chance to watch these little guys, they are fun to watch. And if you see a plant with these little ovals cut out of it, if you sit around long enough, you just may get to see them work. It's fascinating to watch them bite those little holes and carry it off with them. Leafcutter bees are super pollinators. They're tiny, friendly little bees, rarely sting, and if they do, it's not quite as bad as with a lot of the other bees. Holes in the leaves does little harm to the plant, and the bees are such important pollinators that we don't dare do away with them. The leafcutter bees, quite a few of them, 242 species that are native to North America. And this statement was amazed me, and I would love to see which leafcutter bee this is. One type of leafcutter bee that is not native was introduced intentionally into parts of North America to pollinate alfalfa plants. I thought, wow, I'd love to see what kind that are different from the ones we already have. And then we have the sweat bees, these little metallic sweat bees. It's actually, sweat bee is the common name of a family of bees, Halictidae. They're the most prevalent of bees. After honeybees, they're the most numerous, and they're found globally. They're tiny, up to 1/2 inch, and they can be social or solitary. They're one of the few groups that can be either. Depending on that species, they typically do nest underground. They have little metallic bodies. They're usually green. They'll often look like the same color as the plant, except they're so shiny. They can range between blues and purples. They aren't as fuzzy as other bees, and a lot of times when we look at them, we think we're looking at a fly. Okay, so what if I want all these pollinators, the wasps and bees? Well, plant lots of natives. And make sure, if you can, that you have blossoms of some kind every month of the year. Watch for possible nest sites. If you've got openings between your plants or under your trees, don't compact the soil by stomping on it. Let it be. It might be the perfect home for one of these little wasps or bees that's going to help pollinate the plants in your yard. On the undisturbed soil gives them a chance to dig down, make their little runs, and plant their babies down in the ground, ready to pollinate your yard or just be fun to watch. Another thing we want to do is leave our leaf litter, because the overwintering bees and wasps use a lot of that as cover for whatever life cycle they are in. other caterpillars and moths, a lot of them use this leaf litter. Don't run it through your shredder. Leave it under your trees and shrubs when you can. The little critters will appreciate having a place to, it's like a blanket over them. One thing we can do is learn about them. We offer classes on bee houses or bee hotels, and take a class. It's fun to put one of these up. They're not going to save all your wasp and bees, but they will give you a chance to get up close and personal to a lot of the guys we just talked about. They're fun to use, and especially if you've got a young person around, make sure they have an opportunity to put one of these together and enjoy what happens with the little house. One thing we can all do is reduce how much we use, reduce the toxic pesticides to the very minimum, and use it very carefully, what we do use. We don't want to destroy anything that isn't absolutely necessary. So keep your flowers happy, give the bees and wasps a place to live, and let's sum it up. Wasps provide us with free, eco-friendly, natural pest control services, and over 100 species of plants around the world rely solely on wasps. And we don't think about the pollination that a lot of wasps do, but 100 of them specific. Bees are the keystone. If bees die off, it'll end a lot of life. In nature, various animals depend on bees for their survival because their food sources, nuts, berries, seeds, and fruits, rely on insect pollination. And there we are, folks. If you've got questions about gardening, there's a number you can call or an email you can use. And I hope that you will remember that they'll answer any kind of garden questions. But if they don't know the answer to your wasp and bee problems, they'll look it up and get back with you. That's it, folks. Do I have questions?
Let me look, Hester. I don't see any there. If you
Good.
have questions, please enter them in the chat, or if you wish.
Their best question is going to go to the extension office anyway, because I don't consider myself an expert. You probably know as much about wasp and bees by listening to that program as I know. I've just enjoyed watching them.
You covered it very well. You really did. Like I said, you can raise your hand and we'll unmute you if you oh, here's one. Where do hornets fit into this? Into the booth?
Oh goodness. Hornets.
Sue Kelly wants to know.
I keep thinking, what are they beneficial for? And that's one thing. I'm sorry. Like I said, don't use it for a piñata. But I don't know how much pollinating they do. I really don't know. I do know that they do kill some other insects that we might not want, because they do kill other critters and put them into the little spaces in their nest. But that's about it, folks.
Okay.
Hornets are not welcome in my yard.
So that's, and then there was a question also about difference between wasp and hornets, but you just answered that, didn't you?
The hornets are wasps. They're in the yellow jacket group. They're not yellow, but they are in the yellow jacket group. And but the yellow jackets behave differently than the hornets do. Although the nest of the yellow jackets that are in structures, the more eastern ones, they look a lot like hornets' nest. That's what I said. They're all in the same group.
Okay, here's a good question. Is there a source to identify which plants bloom by month to help us better plan for food sources?
Oh goodness. I don't know. The list that's put out by Native Plants gives the growing cycle. It tells that when different plants bloom. If you go to it, it'll tell us which ones are sun, which ones are shade, and when they bloom. I think if you went through that, probably as good as any, the wild in all website, if you look at that, it'll pick your plants and give you the blooming time for a lot of them. But there's not a sheet that you can get that gives you everything you need. There's one that we used to hand out from native system, but I don't have a good answer.
Debbie Boyle wants to know, have you seen wasps in your house structure? Not on the outside, but like in the siding?
No, although that carpenter bee was was coming in. Wasp will. I have a patio door that I leave open because my dog can come in and out. The wasp tried to come in and make a nest inside my house, but not in the walls. No.
Okay. If you add beneficial nematodes, do they harm the bees or the wasps?
I have a question on that. I really don't know. I do know that nematodes are going to take in the larva stage of a lot of things, and if they're down in the ground where those bees and wasps are, the smaller ones, they might, but I do not know. Somebody find the answer to that, and we'll share it.
Okay. Donna wants to know, why am I seeing so many wasps on my bean plants?
Oh, I don't know what it is on your bean plants, Eli, but I've had an influx of wasps this year. I've got 2 on the back of my house and 2 on the front of my garage, and I found 3 of them on the vines on my fence line. I don't know. I don't know what attracts them, unless there's some spiders or wasps that are little critters that they're trying to get to feed their young, and there may be something on those plants that's attractive to them. But I've had one of my biggest wasp nests was in my iris bed. Had no idea what brought it there, but he couldn't tell me. They couldn't tell me why they were there. Sorry, good answer.
Patrick wants to know, does current bee decline affect the native bees also?
Well, we have a current insect decline, and the bees and the wasps are involved. A lot of it has to do with a lot of different things. We talk about the overuse of pesticides, the spraying, like mosquito spraying, that's supposed to control mosquitoes, but it kills everything that it touches. It's not selective. And we have habitat loss. And even when we don't have habitat loss, we have it so fragmented that it doesn't give good nesting sites for them to move around. So we've got a lot of reasons, and some of our insects, not just wasps and bees, are really on the endangered list. And bumblebees, I mentioned earlier, there are a couple of the bumblebees, not the Texas ones, but on the coast, I think one in California and one in Florida, that were so endangered they were afraid they were going to lose them. But now they're using bumblebees inside greenhouses and stuff, so they are making the net. So we do have a decline. We just have to, maybe climate change has something to do with it. It may, but we need to do what we can. And I think the reducing our pesticide use and being willing to let them live in our yard when they're not bothering us is probably our best thing.
Okay. That's all the ones that I've seen so far.
Okay, that's probably it.
We had real good attendance tonight.
Thank you, folks.
Yes. And they all really liked your presentation.
Well, I love bees and wasps. I think they're fun. So
As long as they don't sting me, I like them just fine too.
I've had very few stings, but I have, unfortunately, grabbed them. I'd be cleaning the fence line and I would grab a plant and not realize I was grabbing a paper wasp nest. That's not smart.
Let's see, Diane Taylor has a question. She raised her hand. You can unmute Diane and ask your question.
I just wanted to say thank you, Hester.
Oh, Diane, you're welcome. It's my pleasure. It's fun.
And Margaret has a question. Margaret, what's up?
I may have pressed the wrong icon. I just wanted to let Hester know how much I enjoyed her presentation and that I learned a number of things from it tonight.
We all did. I don't know if I could only remember it, it'd be great. Okay, that's all I see.
Okay.
So, like I said, you pretty well covered it all very well.
Well, Dick, let's close it for tonight then.
All
And
right.
any questions that come up, just let the extension office know.